Namaste, everybody. Good evening to all of our viewers in Israel, India, and Europe. And good afternoon to our viewers in the American continent. Thank you for joining us. The Indian Jewish Heritage Center, together with the Cochin Jewish Heritage Center in Nevatim, are happy to host for the 97th talk in our Heritage on Zoom program, Professor Anna Schultz, for a talk on the Bene Israel Women's notebooks. Anna was born and grew up in the United States. When she was 18, her parents were posted in India for working purposes. She traveled with them, and they lived in Pune. In college, she studied music and anthropology. A friend convinced her to study Marathi, which she did, and I can say she talks very good Marathi. Tichi Marathi uttam hai. She fell in love in India and calls her my second home. Her advanced studies were musicology and history. She visited and stayed in India many times, and she took kirtan lessons from a Brahmin priest. She wrote a paper on the Marathi kirtan and its connection to nationalism. She taught in Minnesota University for 4 years, in Stanford for 8 years, and for the last 4 years, she is Associate Professor of Music at the University of Chicago, where she is also an associate member of the Department of South Asian Languages and Civilizations. She is also a member of the Greenberg Center for Jewish Study. The core issue animation of her research in India and beyond is music's power to activate profound religious experiences that in turn shape other identities. That's what it does. It shapes other identities. Her first book, Singing in Hindu Nation, Marathi Devotional Performance and Nationalism, was published in 2013, and her second book, Songs of Translation, Bene Israel, Gender and Textual Orality, is forthcoming soon. Professor Anna Schultz, the cathedra is yours. Please.
Thank you so much to Avner Isaac and the Indian Jewish Heritage Center for this invitation. It's really an honor to be here today talking to all of you. And thanks for everyone who came today, shared songs and stories with me as I did this research on Bene Israel Women's songs. As I was listening to the video at the beginning, it really made me happy to see old friends, some of whom I'll mention today. If you're wondering if I'll ever finish my book on Bene Israel Women's songs, I promise I'm almost at the end, so hopefully very soon. And I just wanted to say I'm going to be reading these comments because I thought it would keep me on track and make sure that I really welcome your feedback and questions and suggestions. And hopefully if I get off track, you'll get me back on track. And I also wanted to say, probably if you post comments while I'm speaking, I won't be able to see them, but I'll look forward to looking at them afterward. All right, so his sister's song notebook, Samson Birwadkar, who's here today, read Sophiecha Mamani Gaile, or Sophie's uncle sang. He continued, some Sophie, some relative of ours, her maternal uncle, had sung this song when he came to her house. But this song is also, he got it from somebody, but he sang it at our house, so somebody made it a point to write it down in my family. My sisters, one of my sisters, perhaps. As Mr. Birwadkar's memory illustrates, Bene Israel song notebooks are women's notebooks. They shape and record oral performance, and they activate gathered to sing together in Marathi. This talk considers how people have used notebooks to activate memory, resound history, enrich sociality, and transmit musical repertories. Today, women are the main performers of Marathi Jewish songs, and they rarely perform without song notebooks in hand. Are more than the sum of their tattered pages and neatly written texts. They're conduits between written and oral worlds, between generations, and between women who sit together looking over the same notebook. Marathi songs are central to women's gatherings and themselves beyond these groups as community leaders and cultural experts. I will provide an introduction to the social life of notebooks before zooming in on 4 song examples: a biblical song, a metrical psalm, and 2 wedding songs. Each of these songs contains a deep history of migration and intercommunity relationality, as well as more intimate memories of friendship, family, and performance. Throughout much of the history of South Asianist scholarship, Sanskritists and literatures studied oral texts as though they were written, leaving the study of performance and oral tradition to anthropologists, ethnomusicologists, and folklorists. By the same token, ethnomusicologists were happy to live in the moment, turning a blind eye to the written texts in front of them. This division of labor is becoming somewhat organized as literature scholars discover how Hindu texts resound with song and embodiment, while ethnomusicologists also uncover the literacies hidden in the shadows of oral performance and transmission. I enter this conversation as a music ethnographer who keeps stumbling upon texts that lead me to other texts that ultimately guide me back to performance. More specifically, women's singing leads me to women's notebooks, which reference publications that are based on performance. But as I hope to show in this talk, this route is not a neat circle, but a circuitous path. Indian Jewish song notebooks occupy a middle space between what Diana Taylor refers to as the archive of supposedly enduring materials and the ephemeral repertoire of embodied practice knowledge. Notebooks endure beyond the moment of performance, but are not curated or analyzed by anyone other than the singer family member. They are a relational archive of performance. The power of notebooks, like archive objects, lies with its ability to cross space and time, but that power does not transfer to someone else, to an archivist. It remains with the singer or reader. In one woman's hand, touched by many women's voices, lies a well of community expertise, challenges of life and migration. One might even say that notebooks do not move across temporal and spatial gulfs, but rather they collapse them. Every notebook-aided performance is inflected by embodied memories of earlier performances. These notebooks are more than song mnemonics, it's of care, connection, and memory. Women's song notebooks are found in South Asian women's performance across religious communities. As such, they're a force for both intra-community and inter-community relationality and sociality. And I'll just mention Barbara Taylor's work on song notebooks, Cochin Jewish song notebook. Between the late 19th century and 1930s, both men and women were interested in writing down Bene Israel songs, but men did not keep notebooks that I'm aware of. Instead, they printed and published mirathons and plays in an effort to carve a distinctively Jewish space within the incipient Jewish nation. This song publishing scene waned in the second quarter of the 20th century when many Indian Jews began retuning their attention toward Israel and Hebrew, as well as kirtans and plays from the, I believe, 1880s through 1920s. That said, until about the 1960s, and still to some extent today, men, women, girls, and boys all sang at Shabbat table on Friday evenings. And Marathi songs were integral to Jewish ceremonies and celebrations in which both men and women participated. I met some men with rich repertories of Marathi Jewish song, such as Noah Masil, Joshua Pingle, Samson Birwadkar, to name just. But I met many more women who regularly gather to sing together in groups. Each notebook is at once a cherished personal possession and a relational composite of the repertories of aunts, uncles, and friends. It's also a catalyst for memories of the people from whom the songs were learned or the context in which they were sung. In these 2 images, the late Sophie Moses indicated in her notebook which song songs are her own and which she learned. As the late Ivy Chirad of Lud turned the pages of her notebook with her friends Helen Dalkar, who I believe is here today, and Aliza in attendance, she remembered the people from whom she learned the songs and the contexts in which she performed them. She of Flora Samuel when she came to the page in her notebook with Mrs. Samuel's composition. Before singing Yerushalayim Suvarnachi, a Marathi version of the Hebrew song Yerushalayim Shel Zahav, Ivy said, "I feel proud to tell you that Flora Samuel, till the end, wanted that only I will sing this song."
Yerushalayim Suvarnachi, ताम्राची वे तेजाची, मी वीणा तुझी याग साऱ्या गीतांची, दुराविलो पासूनी दोन भारत भूमीच्या फुक्षी वसुनी झालो धन्य, भारताने बहु प्रेमे पोशियले आमा, फळे फुले यांनी उदित सर्वा.
Singing and seeing this song in her notebook, Ivy was reminded of Flora's brilliance as a poet. The re-performance in Ivy's living room sparked collective reflection on the process of composition, on how Flora inserted tropes from the original Hebrew song into her new Marathi lyrics. With enthusiasm in their voices, Helen, Aliza, and Ivy shared the experience of singing, remembering, and interpreting. Sharona Kandelekar, Rivka Moshe, and Sipora Nalgaonkar at Tiferet Israel Synagogue in Mumbai also think of songs in terms of their source. And I believe Rivka and Sipora are here. So they copied several songs from the notebook of their mentor, Diana Pingley. And after she moved to Ashdod, Israel, they mentioned her every time they sang a song from her collection. The late Annie Benjamin Rohekar had a vast repertory of songs, represented materially by her warm person who fed me a multi-course meal nearly every time I saw her. Annie was a beloved for her kindness and respected for her cultural memory. During my second visit, Annie laid out a pile of notebooks, two of them with old-fashioned covers depicting children in 1950s dress, with her for more than 50 years. The smallest notebook would accompany her on trips, and the notebooks were filled with songs she'd learned from family and friends. She wrote down lyrics when someone sang them, or else she wrote the lyrics herself. Born in 1933 in Srivardhan in 1952 following her wedding. Her marriage had been arranged by her beloved grandfather, Samuel Elijah Kolatkar, who was the center of her world. He taught her the songs that comprised her huge repertory and created a religious environment in their home that she carried for the rest of her life. In her notebooks, she recalled the prayers, feasts, and ceremonies her grandfather had hosted in their home, and that left his voice, as she said, in her ear. As she told me, "I know all the songs," and she really did. That's because I've heard them since childhood. My grandfather. Turning the pages of her notebook led Annie to recall memories of her family and village life, as if she were turning the pages of a scrapbook. In this conversation, she remembered the experience of singing with her sister.
आवड होती नाही नाही पण आता ती काय करता ती स्वतः नाही गाणं बोलत
बर 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 तुमच्या बरोबर
माझ्या बरोबर बोलत होती तर ती आणि मी जोडी होती आमची
ओके
ती आणि मी सगळीकडे आम्ही कुठे लग्नाला गेलो काय हन्ना आणि मोजेल
ओके
जाऊन आपलं गाणं बोलायचे आणि आम्ही आजोबा आमचं ती भात बिकतो त्या बायका बोलतो मुलींना तुम्ही नाही तुम्ही बसाय तुम्ही गाणी बोला आम्ही काम करतो मग आम्ही गाणी बोलायची त्या मजा शेतात काय काम करायचं ते करायचे तुला तुम्ही बसा येत आणि गाणी बोला नुसती मी आणि मोजे
It looks like you can hear that.
Yes, we did.
Were you able to hear okay?
Yes.
Good. Okay. So I've mentioned just a few of the many individuals who shared their notebooks and songs with me during interviews in their homes. But song notebooks are also a part of everyday life. They're a regular fixture at Bene Israel Women's gatherings, sponsored officially by by groups of friends. These groups are in turn part of a broader ecosystem of Indian women's organizations that emerged in the 19th century to promote women's education and social progress. The highlight of my work included gathering with women to sing, listen, play. A common thread across these many gatherings is the importance of the Marathi language, nurtured as an inclusive medium of communication and as a font of Bene Israel identity. The first Bene Israel women's organizations were intimately connected with Jewish girls founded by university-educated women, many of whom were also teachers. These organizations offered social services for impoverished women and held classes, workshops, and discussions on social and religious topics for all Bene Israel women. Dr. Jerusha Chirad and Miss Rebecca Rubin founded the Bene Israel Stri Mandal in Bombay in 1930. Sampson, later Mrs. Sarah Ezekiel, founded the Pune Bene Israel Stri Mandal in 1917 with Abigail Himes. The Pune Stri Mandal folded in 1935, and participation in the Bombay Bene Israel Stri Mandal began diminishing as families migrated onward. Beginning in the latter quarter, these older groups were replaced by new women's organizations and collectivities that ranged from fairly formal dues collecting groups with president, secretary, and treasurer to less formal but regular gatherings of women who meet to socialize and teach one another. The Eves Association, Maila Mandal, founded in 1984, meets monthly at the Shar HaShamayim Synagogue in Thane and is currently very active. The Jewish Community Center, run by the AJDC, is another hub for Bene Israel life, including women's activity. Baikla Bombay, another women's group, Hadassah Haverot, met for prayer and Tanakh study every Shabbat from the late 1980s through about 2018 at Magen David Synagogue. In Israel, as many of you know better than I do, there are also several Indian women's organizations, such as the Lud Maila Mandal. In about 2010, a small group of women who lived near Tiferet Israel Synagogue in the Jacob Circle neighborhood, Sharona Kandleker, Sipora Gaukar, Ruby Rivka Moshe or Shir Gaukar, and Diana Daisy Bingley, began meeting after Shabbat as the Torah. Some of them had previously been attending the Hadassah Habarot meetings, but decided to stay closer home when it became too arduous to make it to Magen David. A small but dedicated group, it was also the one I joined most often. At mornings, after the 3 to 4 hour service has concluded, Kiddush has been performed, Shabbat songs have been sung in Hebrew, and raisin sorbet, samosas, and chai have been consumed. The synagogue goers disperse, and my friends go back to their apartments to fetch their books. Books in hand, the women assemble in Auntie's breezy, spacious flat or in the synagogue itself, and reattach coverings to their hair. In this domestic space, they mediate and translate the liturgy in phases, moving from reading to chanting, to singing, and from the utterance of Hebrew words to Marathi interpretations, and finally the oral performance of these texts in song. Although these women are neighbors, this is often the only time during the week when they, regularly gather, and first hour is spent chatting about various things. When the time is right, they all Mopadesh, a 1969 Marathi translation of and commentary on the weekly Torah portions by S.R. Walter. They then sing the daily Psalms in Hebrew using a Devanagari transliteration before moving on to a book of Marathi commentary on those Psalms by Samson and Dinah Korlekar of Mumbai. They end with singing often, first Davidachis or handwritten notebooks, then other Marathi Jewish songs from those same notebooks. Marathi song is a central aspect of this group's religious practice, and song notebooks are part of their study arsenal. As is the case with other singers mentioned in the beginning of this chapter, my friends from Tiferet think of their notebooks. They copied several songs from Bingley Auntie's notebook, and after she moved to Israel, they mention her every time they sang a song from her collection. Sipora's father had a particularly robust repertoire, and she often spoke of him when she read the words of songs he taught her. Encounter on the neatly written pages of these notebooks. Well, one thing they don't contain is musical notation. Melodies are transmitted by singing and listening rather than by reading. So you really need to learn songs in the presence of other people and from others. And just a few kind of like general comments about Bene Israel Marathi song style. First, there are just like multiple sources for tunes, and I'll go into a couple of those today, but they include Marathi drama music, Natya Sangeet, that's very common, especially, and devotional genres, film song, some from Christian hymns, and other Jewish liturgical melodies borrowed from Bene Israel liturgical melodies, as well as Cochin or Ashkenazi melodies, and other sources as well. And in performance, you hear inflections by Indian modes and ornamentation. Most songs are sung in unison and often led by a senior member, and often, but not always, a cappella. So here's a wonderful performance by Diana Pingale of Daha Adnya, or tenor. It's kind of similarity to Rag Bhairavi, and you can also hear her lovely ornamentation.
तुम्हालागी देव असावा तो एक नसावे अनेक निरंतर मूर्ती करुण नये पडो पाया भक्ती जाती वाया खरो खर.
Many notebooks have an index, and these indices often list songs. So I'll now focus on the histories and present-day memories surrounding 4 songs: a Bible story song, a psalm, a Mehndi song, and a Varat. So each example offers a fascinating window and within the Bene Israel community. And other song categories I didn't mention are songs of praise and devotion, kirtan, other songs for life cycle events, in addition to wedding songs, lullabies, circumcision songs, and others as well. So I'll begin with a Bible story song that many of you may know called Matzah Yosef, one of the most beloved songs of the Bene Israel and a staple in women's notebooks. The singers you'll hear, I've already mentioned, are for these friends. Singing prompts religious discussion, reminiscing, and the intimacy of collective performance. Matzah Yosef seems to have a particularly powerful emotional pull. Not only is the text heart-wrenching, but it's been a central part of the 19th century and is thus tightly bound with personal and collective memories. The song is Jacob's lament upon seeing his son Joseph's blood-soaked coat and being unsure whether his favorite son is dead or alive. Jacob cries, "Has anyone seen my Joseph? Someone please tell me," going on attached the young, handsome boy had been to him. One Saturday, the 4 friends sang Matzah Yosef after a service in which the week's Torah reading included the story of Joseph's capture. And singing the song prompted a discussion of biblical and clearly estrangement, even as the experience of singing brought back their imaginations to time singing this song with parents and grandparents. And I give credit to Sarah Manasseh. I took the lyrics here from notes to Eliyahu Hanabi CD. Singers describe both the text and its tune as profoundly sorrowful. It's performed slowly and with a sense of gravitas in an unaccompanied 9-beat meter. The melody is in an incomplete major scale, and thanks also to Sarah Manasseh for that. It's orbiting about a range of a 6. The genre is an OV, which is a Marathi poetic or song genre comprised of a verse of 4 lines, the first 3 of which rhyme and have the same number of syllables. And then the 4th line is non-rhyming and usually has then other lines. I'm not hearing this, are you? So Mata Yosef is a literary OV. There are different types of OVs, and it's in the style of the 16th century Bhakti Saint Ignat, who often wrote in OVs. And indeed, Sophie Moses' notebook, and thanks again to Nissim Moses, that its refrain is almost the same of that as an Ignati OV called Madza Krishna. So just one word is substituted there. But although the poetry of Madza Yosef is really different from any OV I've heard in other contexts. And as Avner may have mentioned when I couldn't hear, my earlier research is on other types of Marathi devotional music. In puzzling over this unusual, the tune was borrowed, and many of you probably know this, from Cochin Jews, who use it for unison singing during Shavuot, Sukkot, Simchat Torah, and other festivals. In Maharashtra, Bene Israel people have adapted this tune for a wide range of contexts. It's sung to liturgies and is the tune that a groom uses to welcome his bride to the synagogue for the wedding. In the latter context, it's attached to Nava Mikul or Yonati Ziv, a 16th century piyut by Israel Najara of Damascus. So let me just play a bit of work. Yosef then takes inspiration from multiple sources to craft a song that is distinctively Bene Israel. Another song genre present in almost all notebooks is Davidachi Gite, Marathi metrical translation. These songs are drawn from a book of the same name, which was created as part of the broader effort to evangelize through vernacular Bible translations. Edited by the Anglican missionary Charles Pinhorn Farrar and published in 3 volumes between 1836 and 1839, enough to produce a second edition in 1850 and a third edition in 1890. This book quickly caught on with Bene Israel readers. By the late 19th century, these Marathi psalms were sung during some of the most significant moments in a Bene Israel person's life. Since psalms have been staples in the repertories of Bene Israel women, sustained through oral performance and distributed as photocopies and copied into song notebooks. These are beloved songs, so bound with memory in women's lives that the mere mention of Davidachi Gite brought tears. When I mentioned Davidachi Gite, I suddenly went into the memory of my mom. So I'll now zoom in on Rivka Sharona Sipura and Diana Pingle's performance of Psalm 1, which is Gite, composed in the Marathi devotional meter known as Abhanga. This succinct metrical psalm uses arboreal imagery to describe the joy of a pious person before contrasting this ideal type with a wicked person who will be punished by God. Prosodically, this Marathi psalm, like most abhangas, it's composed of a series of rhymed couplets in which each line has 8 syllables. But actually, there are different forms of abhangas. This is just one of several forms of abhanga. Unlike most abhangas, though, this one does not include the name of the poet in the final line. In terms of music, in Hindu Bhakti contexts, abhangas are typically accompanied by mridang, which you see here, a double-headed drum, and tal, these small hand cymbals. In both solo and collective styles, Hindu abhangas are sung to an 8-beat, which fits neatly with its 8-beat prosody, and it's basically din, da, din, din, tage, din, na, din, din, tage. And when sung in groups, it's sung in call and response. So here is an abhanga sung in a kirtan by Dada Maharaj Manmarkar, that I recorded in 2000. So as I think you'll hear, abhangas sung in Bene Israel contexts are completely different from this style you just heard. If a Varkari song leader introduces a new abhanga tune, both because of the tune, but also because of the call and response. Bene Israel women, on the other hand, sing abhangas without call and response, so it's helpful to have a pre-existing knowledge of the tune in order to participate. So learn from your friends and be able to sing together. And in keeping, maybe I'll just say, unlike in Bhakti contexts, Bene Israel people sing abhangas without accompaniment. In the absence of a drummer, Bene Israel singers rely on their own proficiency with the given to stay rhythmically coordinated. So when Diana Pingle leads her friends from Tiferet in singing Psalm 1, their tune and timing are beautifully coordinated, even though it's quite complicated rhythmically. There's a tricky syncopation in the second line of the couplet. See this measure here. But they sing with a really strong sense of both pulse and meter. In their version, there are 8 beats in the first 2 lines and 9 beats the second line of text. In other clear meter, but it's not in Bhajani Teka. What this suggests to me is that these singers have so thoroughly translated this abhanga into an unaccompanied Jewish women's song form that it no longer bears the rhythmic identity of the Varkari genre kind of inscribed in the missionary translation. It's so beautiful and so very different. So let me play that for you. Hopefully this works. So in this final section, I'll discuss memory, sense, and togetherness in a third category of songs found in women's notebooks, wedding songs. These songs are performed by women in events leading up to and during and after a wedding, family at the cusp of separation from them. Replete with references to smell, color, touch, and sound, wedding songs are sensorially and emotionally rich. Prenuptial mehndi songs recount joyfully the pleasure of moving, touching. Varat songs produce a very different affect. These post-nuptial melancholic songs focus on tactility at a time when the touch of a mother and friend will soon vanish from everyday experience. Wedding songs in the past were also commonly shared with women from other. In her account of North Indian wedding songs, Kiran Narayan argues that female friendships and songs about those friendships provide emotional support during the transition from the male-defined kin group of childhood to that of married life. She writes of wedding songs, evaluating him when he arrives, singing tearful farewells when the departure for his home is at hand. Female friends let a bride know she is not alone. Daniel Shalom Karilkar in 1902 collected 160 prenuptial swing songs. In the prenuptial ceremony songs like the ones in this book are found in most homes of our Bene Israel people. In a sentiment echoed by people I spoke with in recent years, Karilkar acknowledged that many wedding songs are shared with other communities. Indeed, these songs are in the mixture of Hindi, coastal Marathi, that provide a clue to everyday engagement between communities. All three of the songs on this page are in a mixture of Hindi and Marathi. It's a really, really interesting songbook. During time ceremony, now the latter has largely been dispensed with, but the Mehndi continues to be a common part of larger Bene Israel wedding festivities. The Mehndi affirms the auspiciousness of the marriage and offers one last time for the bride's family and friends to gather. For a glimpse of a modern-day Mehndi ceremony, Sharona at Tiferet, Israel, in 2014 before her wedding to Joel. Sharona sat in a green sari while a friend drew henna designs on her hands. This was followed by a ritual in which female friends and family threw rice on them 5 times with a banknote that was then left as a gift. At Sharona's Mehndi, a recorded soundtrack of Mehndi songs accompanied the ritual. Note the centrality of touch and taste to these actions. Friends applied henna, and everyone has a chance to feed the bride. Songs I heard had a strong beat that one could imagine clapping or dancing with, and some are in women's dance genres. Elizabeth Galsurkar's Mehndi song from a 1925 book is set to the tune of a Hindi Mehndi song in a lilting 6/8 meter. Note here the focus on color and friends singing together.
गाणी गाती सैल्या मिळोनी गाणी गाती सैल्या मिळोनी मेहंदीचा निवार की मेहंदी लाल रंगे गुलजार.
For back vivid memories of singing and moving with friends and family. Elizabeth Galsurkar remembered the feeling of singing wedding songs with other women and regretted that live song had been replaced by tape recorders. When she went through her notebooks with me, she remarked several times that she had not heard some of these songs for a very long time.
पिक्चरची गाणी हे आवडतात आजकाल तर ते आपलं हे जुनं ना आवडत कोणाला काय नाहीच आवडत. माझी मुलं हे काय मम्मी आता ही जुनी झाली काय बोलतोस तू अशी बोलते.
लग्नाच्या वेळी आहे का?
पहिले आम्ही बोलायच्या आम्ही बोलायची पहिली किती सली लागायची ते का बोलायच्या पण आता सोडलाय. आता टेप रेकॉर्ड लावली
केव्हापासून सोडला?
आता किती वर्ष सोडले.
I'm sorry for how I make so many comments while she's talking. I should learn to sit quietly and listen. Just an older way of life, these songs were generally remembered with joy. In their original context of performance, they presented a pedagogy of affect, telling the bride to be happy and telling the singers to convey their joy and blessings. In remembering those songs after the practice of singing, the songs continue to provide an affective map, telling the singer how to remember joyfully and what to remember, singing with friends. In recalling those songs, singers embodied those memories with smiles and clapping, and they remembered friends with whom they had sung. And so here you'll hear the Ashdod Mayala Mandal. For women in more traditional South Asian families, weddings can be achingly ambivalent. On one hand, they represent the new security and respect of marital status, but on the other hand, they evoke sadness, anxiety of leaving the care of one's mother to move in with a family of strangers. If Mehndi and other prenuptial songs celebrate the auspiciousness of the occasion and the joy of gathering to celebrate it, Barat songs express the painful side of a young bride's marriage. The Varat is the post-wedding occasion when with songs, tears, rituals, and food. While singing Varat songs, family members touch the bride for the last time before she leaves the house. Karunya Veni Pani is typical of the musical and affective register of traditional Varat songs. And here, the text in this rework centers around the intimacy of touch and care between a new bride and the family she's leaving. She sings of braiding her own hair, but she might remember the touch of her mother's hands on her hair. She sings of her younger siblings, who she can. Noreen, who grew up in Pune and Mumbai and now lives in New York, remembered that her mother sang this song as Noreen was preparing to leave for her new marital home. She sang the first two verses while tying Noreen's hair in a bun as their maid adorned it with flowers. But she was unable to finish because all three broke down. The melancholy of this song is amplified by the presence of real touch. Varat songs provoke the catharsis of sadness and weeping. The memories that accompany the singing or hearing of these songs similarly inspire the recollection of the pain of family separation when the bride leaves home. This one also doesn't appear to be playing.
ऐके मी जाते सासऱ्यासी करून यावेनी पणी आया बायानो या माझ्या संगयानो या माझ्या संगती वाट तुमची मी रोज पाही वाट तुमची मी रोज पाही आई गे मी जाते सासऱ्यासी करून मुला बाळांनो या माझ्या जवळी मुला बाळांनो या माझ्या जवळी चुंबन घेते मी तुमची ताई चुंबन घेत माझी ताई आई गे मी जाते सासऱ्यासी करून यावेनी पणी आई गे मी जाते सासऱ्यासी करून यावेनी पणी.
So beautiful. And I apologize, I noticed that I had a spelling mistake here, but that translation was done by Noreen Daniel herself. Bene Israel song notebooks challenge notions of ephemeral. They carry performance across time, but the performances and re-performances last only as long as the memories of the subjects who lived them or the descendants who become the recipients of treasured post-memories. The fragility of notebooks is the fragility of lives. A relational archive books come alive at women's gatherings, in synagogues and homes. Reading the words loosens melodies for memories, and because melodies are learned from others and sung with others, the remembrance of melody is inseparable from the remembrance of others. Song notebooks conserve archive. But an even greater treasure is the embodied performance of Bene Israel songs. Today, the numbers of women who sing from song notebooks are dwindling. Young Jewish women in India are often educated at English medium schools, and most second-generation Indian Jewish are more comfortable speaking Hebrew. But those women who do sing Marathi Jewish songs are using their musical memories to bolster friendship and articulate new identities as cultural experts and community leaders. So let's continue to listen and sing along. So thank you very much. I look forward to your questions and comments, either now or feel free to email me afterwards. There is my email address, so feel free to jot it down. Stop my share here.
Okay, there's two comments in the chat.
Okay.
One of them is from Flori Shimoni from Ashdod. She writes that her grandfather did write his songs in a notebook, and it was written nearly 100 years ago, and she has the privilege
Wow.
of preserving it with her. So Flora, you can share some pictures with us whenever you can. We'll be happy to see them. And Tova Castiel Aaron, she's complimenting and saying it is wonderful to know about this treasure that mentions the woman poetry of Cochin as well.
Great.
Yeah.
Thank you for both of those.
I see Ran has raised a hand. Ran?
Thank you, Anna. Thank you for the lecture. I have a little question about your sources. I saw plenty of sources in Marathi, also probably some of them in English. All of these sources, how did you, I mean, where do you get all of these sources in Marathi?
Yeah. Let me think. The source, there are several different sources. One is there's a wonderful archive, the Brill collection of Indian Jewish published Donna collection of Jewish literature. And so that contains many Marathi Jewish kirtans and other books as well. So when I used to teach at Stanford, we had access to that, so I was able to access some of the documents there. The National Library in Israel also has a wonderful collection, so I have some from...
No, the National Library, I know they have a big collection of Marathi sources. The problem is that nobody touched it yet, and also it needs to be translated. I got from there like a few books, but again, it's need to be a lot of work. Just one question about that. I suppose you are not really, are you speaking or reading Marathi properly, or you have somebody who translated for you all of that?
Ran, she speaks Marathi perfect.
It's a combination. I read Marathi, but I can't read Marathi. I had help in many of my interviews. Some of them I transcribed myself, but I had help from a couple different people who transcribed and translated. Thank you.
I wish to thank you. It was, thank you for sharing. It was very important knowledge, and it really reveals another important piece of our heritage. So thank you very much. Anna, you have the last word, as of course. So I think you're unmuted now and you can say whatever you wanted.
Yes, I really appreciate this opportunity, and I appreciate your feedback and really cherish this opportunity to share. And please do reach out afterward. But thank you again. This was really a pleasure.
Great. Guys, Shabbat Shalom, everybody. Thank you. Stay safe and happy.